Maya had been running for 11 minutes before she realized the trail had disappeared. Not gradually, not the way paths fade when fewer people walk them. It simply ended. One step there was packed earth and the faint press of boot prints ahead of her. And the next step there was nothing but pine needles and the hush of a forest that did not want visitors. She stopped, turned a full circle. The trees looked identical in every direction, tall and close and indifferent, and the light between them was the low gray of late afternoon, which meant she had maybe 2 hours before it became something worse. She had left the main trail at the fork near the 3rd mile marker. She was certain of that much. She had taken the left path because the sign at the junction was sun-bleached, and the arrow that should have pointed right had faded into the wood so completely that she read it as pointing left. A small mistake, the kind that people make every weekend on every hiking trail in the country and walk away from with nothing worse than sore feet and a funny story. She told herself that now to keep calm, because panic was the thing that turned small mistakes into large ones. Her name was Maya Carroll. She was 28 years old. She was a geography teacher at a middle school in a town 3 hours south of where she was standing, and she had been hiking alone on her autumn break because every person she might have invited had other plans and she had decided not to let that stop her. She was practical. She was sensible. She had a map, a compass, a full water bottle, a half-eaten energy bar, a headlamp, a thermal blanket, and enough common sense to know that the first rule when lost was to stop moving and think. So she stopped, and she thought. The elevation had been rising for the last 20 minutes of her walk. She remembered that, which meant if she moved downhill she would eventually find water, and water meant a creek. And creeks in this part of the state fed into the river valley, and the river valley had a road. It was not a fast solution, but it was a logical one, and logic was what she had. She started moving downhill. The slope was gentle at first, then steeper, and the trees thinned slightly as the ground changed from soft needle cover to harder packed clay. She watched where she put her feet. The shadows stretched long and thin ahead of her, and she moved through them carefully, holding branches back from her face, stepping over roots. The forest was quiet except for her own breathing and the occasional crack of something small moving in the brush. A squirrel or a bird, she told herself. Not because she was afraid of anything larger, but because naming things made them less frightening. She had been walking downhill for 30 minutes when she saw the fence. It was not the kind of fence that said keep out in a careless way. Chain-link fences said keep out carelessly. This fence was something else entirely. 6 feet of solid dark wood with horizontal supports behind it. Built close and tight, no gaps wide enough to see through, stretching in both directions through the trees as far as she could see. There were no warning signs on it, no posted notices, no trail of orange markers telling hikers they had reached a boundary. Just the fence itself, which was its own kind of message, and a message that under different circumstances she would have respected immediately. But the light was failing now. She could feel it in the temperature drop, in the way the gray between the trees was thickening into something darker. Her headlamp would work, but headlamps made the forest smaller, reduced it to whatever circle of yellow light you stood inside, and moving through black woods alone with a headlamp was one of those experiences she had no interest in having. She looked at the fence for a long moment. Then she found a section where the base had lifted slightly from the ground, erosion, or the shift of tree roots underneath, and she got down on her stomach and pulled herself through. She told herself it was an emergency. She told herself she would find whoever owned this land and explain. She told herself a great many reasonable things as she stood up on the other side, brushed pine needles from her jacket, and kept moving downhill. The ground leveled out after another 10 minutes. The trees opened, and Maya walked into a clearing that stopped her so completely that for a moment she forgot to breathe. It was not a clearing in the way that word usually means. It was a space, a wide, deliberate, well-maintained space, with a gravel path running through it, and wooden structures visible beyond, low buildings with lit windows, warm light spilling onto the ground outside them. There were people moving between the buildings, their shapes easy and unhurried, the way people move in a place they know well. Somewhere nearby she could smell wood smoke and something cooking, and the smell was so ordinary and so welcome that her legs moved toward it before she consciously decided to go anywhere. She made it about 40 yards before a man appeared from behind one of the buildings. He was young, early 20s she guessed, and he stopped when he saw her with an expression that was not angry and not welcoming but deeply, carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that trained people wore. He had a radio clipped to his jacket. She noticed it immediately. She raised both hands, palms out. "I'm lost," she said. "I crossed a fence about 10 minutes back. I know I shouldn't have, but it was getting dark, and I made a wrong turn off the main trail. I'm not trying to cause any trouble." He looked at her for a moment, then he reached for the radio. She stood still while he spoke quietly into it, his voice too low for her to make out the words. He kept his eyes on her the whole time, not threatening, not hostile, just watchful. She kept her hands where he could see them and tried to look as harmless as she genuinely was. 2 more men arrived within a minute, then 2 more, and then, from a different direction than any of them, a man who was clearly not the same as any of the others. Not in the way he was dressed. He wore plain dark clothes, work clothes, nothing that marked him as significant. Not in how tall he was, though he was tall, and not in how broad his shoulders were, though they were broad. It was something else. It was the way the other 4 men shifted slightly when he arrived, a small unconscious adjustment, the way a room of people adjusts when a door opens and lets in winter air. Not fear, something closer to gravity. He stopped 12 feet from her and looked at her with dark eyes, and no expression at all. She said, before he could say anything, "My name is Maya Carroll. I am a school teacher from Clover Falls. I crossed your fence because I was lost and it was getting dark and I made a bad decision. And I am sorry for that. I will leave immediately, and I will not tell anyone I was here." He did not respond right away. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are deciding what to do with, and she held his gaze because looking away felt like the wrong thing to do. "How did you get through the fence?" he said. His voice was even and quiet, the kind of voice that did not need volume. She told him about the lifted section. He glanced at one of the other men, a brief look that communicated something she could not read, and the man left immediately. "You're alone?" he said. "Yes." "You came off the main trail at which point?" "The fork near the 3rd mile marker. I misread the sign, took the left path." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. He said, "You're about 4 miles from the boundary of the public land. The nearest road from here is 7 miles northeast. You won't make it before dark on foot." She had already calculated something similar. "So what do I do?" "You stay until we arrange an exit. Not you can stay. Not would you like to. You stay." As if the matter had already been decided somewhere before she arrived, and this conversation was simply the notification. She thought about arguing. She looked at the 4 men standing at easy distances around them, none of them threatening, all of them present, and decided that arguing would not help anything. "Okay," she said. He turned and walked toward the buildings. After a brief pause, she followed him, because no one else moved, and it seemed like that was what was expected, and she was tired and cold and very far from her car. The room they gave her was small and clean. A single bed, a chest of drawers, a window that looked out onto the gravel path between buildings. There was a lock on the inside of the door, and not on the outside, which she checked immediately. The bathroom down the hall was shared, and one of the younger men walked her to it and back, without comment, and without crowding her. Someone brought her a plate of food. Rice and roasted vegetables, a cup of tea. She ate everything. She did not know his name yet. She did not know what this place was, exactly. She did not know whether she was a guest or something more complicated than a guest. She pulled the thermal blanket from her pack anyway, layered it under the bed's wool blanket, and lay in the dark listening to the low sounds of a compound that knew exactly what it was doing settling around her for the night. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she had handled difficult situations before. She told herself that everything would be clear by morning. She was wrong about the last part, not because things got worse, because things got stranger and more interesting than anything she had prepared herself for. She woke at 5:30 to the sound of boots on gravel. She sat up in the thin gray light and looked at the window. Outside, men moved in the early dark with purpose, crossing the yard in pairs and small groups. They were not running, they were not speaking loudly. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned long ago that good work did not need to announce itself. She watched them for several minutes, her chin resting on the windowsill. There was something almost peaceful about it. That efficiency, the way each person knew their role and moved to it without confusion or hesitation. She dressed and sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Breakfast arrived at 6. The same young man who had walked her to the bathroom knocked softly and left a tray outside her door. Eggs, bread, more tea. She ate at the small chest of drawers because there was no table, and she looked at the gravel path and thought about the fence and the trail and the mile marker and all the small choices that had brought her here. She was used to being practical about misfortune. Not cheerful about it, not dramatic about it, just practical. Things went wrong. You figured out the next step. You moved. The next step, she decided, was to find out exactly where she was and what kind of a situation she had landed in. At 8 o'clock, the same man who had arrived last night knocked on her door. She opened it. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, and he held one toward her without ceremony. She took it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and waited. which she understood meant she was expected to follow. He led her across the compound in the morning light, and she saw it properly for the first time. It was larger than she had realized in the dark, perhaps a dozen low buildings arranged in a rough semicircle around a central open space, with gardens along the eastern edge and what looked like workshops along the west. Everything was built with the same dark wood, maintained carefully, the kind of upkeep that comes from people who intend to stay somewhere for a long time. He brought her to a building slightly larger than the others and held the door. Inside was a long table and 4 chairs. He sat at one, she sat across from him. In the daylight she could look at him more carefully than she had been able to the night before. He was perhaps mid-30s, though something in his face made age feel like a less useful measurement than usual. He had the look of a person who had made a great many decisions and not all of them easy, and who had learned to carry them without letting them show too clearly. "My name is Cale," he said. It was the first time anyone had said it in front of her. "Maya," she said, "though I told you that last night." "You did." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Tell me about the sign at the fork." So she told him again, in more detail. The way the wood had bleached. The direction of the arrow that wasn't there anymore. He listened without interrupting, and when she was finished he said, "We put a new sign up in July. The post must have rotted in the August rains." "So this has happened before?" "Not this far in," he said. She waited for him to say more. He did not. "Can I ask what this place is?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "A community." "That's not a very complete answer." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She looked at him steadily. He looked back at her, and she had the odd feeling that he was less bothered by her directness than most people were. Most people, when a stranger asked blunt questions, either got defensive or started performing patience. He did neither. He just sat there, as if her question was reasonable and he was deciding how much of a reasonable answer she had earned. "You'll be here for 2 days at least," he said finally. "The person I need to arrange your exit is not reachable until tomorrow evening." "What person?" "Someone who can drive you out without using the main road." She absorbed this. "Why not the main road?" He picked up his coffee cup. "Because the main road goes through the center of the community, and I don't bring strangers through the center of the community." She thought about pointing out that she was already in the center of the community, or near enough. She decided not to. 2 days, she said instead. "Perhaps less, we'll see." She looked out the window at the yard. A woman was crossing it with a basket of something under her arm, moving fast, a child running to keep up beside her. An ordinary morning scene, the kind that happened everywhere. "I'd like to walk around," Maya said. "I won't cause problems. I'm not going to take photographs or ask people things they don't want to answer. I can't sit in that room for 2 days." He looked at her. "You'll have an escort." "Fine. Not optional," he said. "Quiet. Final." "I said fine," she said. "I meant it." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, a small movement, barely visible, the way a weight settles when you put it down. He called for one of the younger men and gave instructions in a low voice. The man nodded and looked at Maya and nodded again. Cale stood. The meeting apparently was over. Maya stood too, and said, because it seemed important to say it, "I'm not here to make your life difficult. I made a mistake, and I know it. I just want to be honest about that." He paused at the door, looked back at her. "I know," he said. "That's the only reason you're still here and not halfway back through the woods." Then he left, and the door closed behind him, and Maya stood in the empty room with her coffee and the morning light, and the feeling that she had just had a conversation with someone she did not yet understand at all, but intended to. Her escort's name was Owen. He was 24, quiet, in an easy way rather than an anxious way, and he showed her the parts of the compound she was permitted to see without commentary unless she asked a direct question, at which point he answered it honestly and briefly and did not embellish. The gardens were serious, not decorative, productive, rows of late-season vegetables, a root cellar built into a slope, cold frames covering the things that were still growing. Someone had put real thought into this land, into the soil, into what it could yield if you worked with it long enough and carefully enough. The workshops held carpentry, metalwork, a room full of shelves stacked with labeled jars. Everything was used, nothing was for show. She did not ask Owen about Cale. She filed what she had seen and thought about it quietly, and by the time he brought her back to her room before lunch, she had arrived at a tentative conclusion that this was not a strange place. It was simply a serious one. There was a difference. She ate lunch alone in her room. The food was good, simple, well-seasoned, made with vegetables she had seen growing 40 yards away. In the afternoon, she read from the book she carried in her pack. A collected history of cartography, the kind of book that most people found deeply boring and she found deeply comforting. She read about how maps are made by people who have never stood where they are drawing, who take the word of travelers and guess at the rest, who name places before they visit them and sometimes never correct the error. She thought it was a good thing to read in a place that did not appear on any map. At 5 o'clock, when the light had softened and the compound outside her window was moving through the quiet, busy transition between day and evening, she heard a knock. She opened the door. Cale stood there, not with coffee this time, not with any particular reason she could identify. He looked at her for a moment. "The fence repair team reported back," he said. "The lifted section is near a drainage run that floods in autumn. It's a structural problem. I wanted you to know it wasn't negligence." She blinked. "Okay. I also wanted to tell you that the contact I need is coming sooner than expected. You may be able to leave tomorrow morning." She thought about this. Tomorrow morning was soon. Tomorrow morning was the resolution of an accident. It was the sensible and logical outcome. "All right," she said. He nodded, started to turn away. "Cale," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "For the room and the food, and for not being unkind about this. You didn't have to handle it that way." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said simply. "I didn't." And then he was gone down the path, and she stood in the doorway watching the evening settle over a place that should not have existed, that appeared on no map she had ever read, that had fed her, and given her shelter, and treated her with a care so understated she almost missed it entirely. She thought about leaving in the morning. She went back inside. She sat on the bed. She opened her book. She read the same paragraph 3 times. She was not thinking about cartography. She did not leave the next morning. Not because anyone stopped her. The contact arrived as promised. A compact, quiet woman named Clara who drove a truck with no marking on it and said almost nothing when she came to collect Maya before breakfast. Clara stood in the doorway of Maya's room with keys in her hand and an expression that suggested she had many other things to do today, and this was one of them. Maya had her pack ready. She had slept and eaten and was as prepared to leave as a person could be. She stood up from the edge of the bed, looked at Clara and said, "I need 5 minutes." Clara looked at her watch. Maya walked across the compound to the building where she had met Cale 2 mornings ago. Owen appeared from somewhere to walk beside her without being asked, which she had started to expect. The building was empty when she arrived. She stood at the table and waited. He came 10 minutes later, moving quickly, stopping in the doorway when he saw her. "Clara is here," he said. "I know." He waited. "I want to ask you something before I go," she said. "And I want you to answer me honestly. Not because you owe me an honest answer, I know you don't, but because I think you're someone who prefers honest things, and so do I." He came the rest of the way into the room. He did not sit. Neither did she. "What is this place?" she said. "Not a community, not a general word. What is it really?" He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, the compound moved through its morning, the sound of tools starting up in the workshops. Someone calling a name across the yard. Ordinary sounds over an extraordinary place. "It is a community," he said. 318 people. 4th generation. We built everything you see here, and everything beyond what you've been shown. We grow food, run trades, educate children, maintain buildings, handle disputes. We have a governing structure and a set of agreements that everyone here has chosen to live under." "Chosen," she said. "Chosen," he said firmly. "No one is held here. Anyone can leave. Some do, some come back, some stay gone." She sat down. Because the information deserved to be received sitting down. And the outside world doesn't know about you. A small number of people do. People who have helped us maintain our privacy. The road in is controlled. The perimeter is maintained. We are not a secret in the way a crime is a secret. We are private in the way a family is private. He paused. "This is the most I have said about this place to a stranger in 11 years. She looked up at him. "Why?" He appeared to consider the question seriously before answering. Which she was coming to understand was simply how he operated. He did not speak before he was ready. "Because you're leaving," he said. "And because you asked honestly." She held his gaze. "You trust that I won't say anything?" "I trust," he said carefully, "that you understood what you saw here before you asked me to explain it. That is not nothing." Clara appeared in the doorway behind him, keys still in hand, expression unchanged. Maya looked at her, then back at Cale. She said, "What's beyond the western buildings? The part I wasn't shown." A pause. "The residential area, the school, the meeting hall, the center of the community," she said. The part you don't bring strangers through. Yes. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said, and then she picked up her pack and went with Clara. The drive out was 40 minutes on unpaved tracks that wound through timber and across 2 shallow creek crossings before meeting a gravel road and then a paved one. Clara dropped her at a gas station on the edge of a town Maya half recognized, handed her a folded piece of paper with nothing on it, and drove away before Maya could think of anything to say. She unfolded the paper in the gas station parking lot. There was a phone number. Nothing else. She stood there in the cold with the paper in her hand, and the gas station behind her, and the ordinary noise of the road, and thought about a room that had fit her, and food that had been good, and a man who spoke in sentences that had nothing wasted in them. She folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket, against her chest, and called for a ride back to her car. She did not look at the paper again for 6 days. Then she looked at it for a long time. Then she dialed the number. It rang 4 times. She was already composing the sentence she would leave as a voicemail when the line connected and a voice, not his voice, someone younger, said, "Yes." She said her name. A pause, then, "Hold on." She held on. The line was clean, no static, no background noise. She listened to the silence of it and tried not to feel foolish. Cale's voice, when it came, was exactly as she remembered. Even, quiet, no surprise in it. "Maya Carroll," he said. "I have a question," she said. "All right. Why did you give me that number?" A long pause, longer than his pauses usually were. She counted to 7 before he answered. "In case you had a question," he said. She breathed out slowly through her nose. "That's a circular answer." "I know." She looked out her apartment window at the parking lot below. The ordinary parking lot of her ordinary building in her ordinary town. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the people who know about your community. The small number." "Yes. I'm not one of them," she said. "Not officially. I stumbled in through a broken fence." "That's accurate. So I'm either a problem or I'm nothing. And if I'm nothing, you wouldn't have given me a number to call." The pause this time was shorter. Also accurate. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window. "I want to understand what I saw. I don't mean I want to study it or write about it or tell anyone. I mean I want to understand it, the way you understand a place by being in it long enough to know what it actually is." She stopped, started again. "I'm a geography teacher. I have a break in 6 weeks. I'm asking if I can come back." She had not planned to say that last part. Or rather, she had been planning it for 6 days and had not been planning to say it quite so directly, and had gone ahead and said it anyway, because it was the truest version of what she meant. The silence on the line lasted long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then Cale said, "That is not a small thing to ask for." "I know," she said. "I know it isn't." Another pause. "Give me 3 days." "Okay. Don't call before then." "I won't." "All right." The line ended. She stood with the phone against her ear for a moment after, listening to nothing, then lowered it and sat down on the floor beside her window and stared at the parking lot until the cold from the glass seeped through her jacket and made her shiver. 3 days. She could manage 3 days. She went to work. She taught her students about map projections, about the way the earth cannot be laid flat without distortion, about how every map is already a choice about what to sacrifice in order to show something else. She graded papers. She made coffee. She answered emails. She did not tell anyone about the fence or the compound, or the man with the quiet voice and the dark eyes, and the 318 people he was responsible for. On the morning of the 3rd day, she sat at her kitchen table with her phone face up beside her breakfast and waited. At 7 minutes past 9, it rang. "You can come back," Cale said, "for 1 week. There are conditions." "Tell me." "You will be shown the community fully, all of it. You will speak to people if they choose to speak to you, and you will not press anyone who does not. You will not take photographs. You will not take notes that could identify individuals. What you learn stays with you." "Yes to all of that. If at any point I decide the arrangement is not working, you leave without argument." "Yes." A pause. "You agree very easily to difficult conditions." "They're not difficult," she said. "They're fair." This time the pause felt different, smaller somehow, as if the space between them had shifted slightly and the distance was not quite the same size it had been. 6 weeks, he said. The 4th week of November, 3 days before the end of your break. "I'll be there on the 21st, she said. "The gate near the drainage run will be left open." "The one I came through before?" "The fence is repaired," he said. "The gate is separate. It locks from the outside. You'll need the code." He gave it to her, 4 numbers. She wrote them on the inside cover of the book she was reading, which was a new book now, A History of Closed Communities, Self-Sufficient Settlements, Intentional Living. She had been reading it for 5 days. She thought he might say something else. He did not. "Kale," she said. "Yes, thank you." The line closed again. She looked at the 4 numbers on the inside cover of the book. She looked at them for a long time. Then she started planning. She was not someone who traveled lightly. She made lists, what she would need, what she should leave behind, what questions she genuinely wanted answered and which ones were just noise. She thought about the gardens and the workshops and the root cellar and the way the buildings were positioned to catch southern light in winter. She thought about the children she had seen from her window, moving between buildings with the easy unself-consciousness of children who had been somewhere their whole lives and never had reason to wonder if it was safe. She thought about the map he lived inside, the one nobody else had, and what it meant to be invited to look at it. She taught her classes. She was present for them, actually present, not distracted. She was a good teacher, partly because she had learned long ago that presence was a discipline and not a mood. But in the margins of the day, in the long quiet of her evenings, she thought about what she had agreed to and what it meant. A week before the 21st, she asked the woman who had lived across the hall from her for 3 years if she would water her one plant. The woman said yes and asked if she was going somewhere nice. Maya said yes, without elaborating. She drove north on the 20th, stopped at a small town 2 hours from the community, ate dinner alone at a diner where the coffee was very good, and slept in a motel with thin curtains and trucks on the highway outside. She lay awake for a while watching the ceiling and thinking about perimeters, about the things that exist around places and people and lives, the boundaries that announce themselves with signs and the ones that do not, the ones you cross by accident and the ones you cross with a code someone gave you. In the morning, she drove the rest of the way, parked her car where Clara had left her, the gas station with the gravel lot, and walked from there, the way she should have walked the first time, following the directions she had studied until she knew them without looking. The gate was a wooden panel flush with the fence, invisible from outside unless you knew it was there. She entered the code. The latch opened. She stepped through. The compound looked the same in the November gray. Colder, the garden stripped to bare soil, frost on the wooden walkways between buildings. Smoke from 2 chimneys, the smell of morning. Owen appeared from the direction of the workshops, and she had the distinct impression he had been watching for her arrival. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he said. "He's waiting." She nodded and followed him across the yard, and when they reached the main building and Owen opened the door, she walked through it with her pack on her shoulder, and her hands steady, and her heart doing something she chose not to name yet, because naming things too early was its own kind of mistake. Cale was at the long table. Coffee, 2 cups. He looked up when she came in. He said nothing, which was already familiar. She took the cup he had left for her and sat across from him and said, "I have a lot of questions." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm going to need to see the school." Something moved in his face, small, controlled, but there. "All right," he said. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at him across the table in the gray November light and understood, somewhere beneath practical and sensible, that she had not come back here only for the questions. The school was not what she expected. She had built a picture of it in her head during the 6-week wait, small, plain, perhaps a single room. The kind of stripped-down education that self-sufficient communities sometimes offered, practical and narrow, heavy on agriculture and light on everything else. She had prepared herself to be politely measured about it. She walked through the door and stopped. There were 4 rooms. 2 for the younger children, 2 for the older ones, and they were bright, genuinely bright, with large windows she had not been able to see from outside, and walls covered edge to edge with maps and drawings and handwritten text in different sizes of handwriting. The maps were the first thing she noticed because maps were always the first thing she noticed, and these were not printed, not downloaded, not bought in a store. They were hand-drawn, every one of them. Some were rough and some were careful, and some were extraordinary. Detailed topographic sketches of the land surrounding the community, labeled with place names she had never heard, a private geography built by people who had learned to see the land by walking it. A woman in her 40s sat at the front of one room reading aloud from a book while 9 children of varying ages worked at tables. She looked up when Maya appeared in the doorway. She did not seem surprised. Cale, beside Maya, said, "This is Nora. She manages the school." Nora had the steady, slightly assessing look of all good teachers everywhere. She stood and came to the door and shook Maya's hand and said, "We heard you were a teacher." Geography and social studies, Maya said. Middle school. Nora looked at her, with what might have been, in a different face, the beginning of respect. Come in properly, she said. The children won't mind. The children, in fact, were deeply interested. Not in the way children are interested in strangers who make a fuss, but in the way they are interested in people who seem to know something worth knowing. A boy of about 10 looked at Maya's pack and said, "Are you from far away?" "About 3 hours south," she said. "What town?" "Clover Falls." He considered this. "I don't know that one. It's not very large. You haven't missed much." He seemed to accept this as a fair accounting. He went back to his work. She stayed in the school for 2 hours. Cale remained in the hallway, present but not hovering, and she understood without being told that she was being given a real look at a real thing, not a managed tour of a prepared version of it. The children were sharp, not uniformly. Some were clearly struggling with the page in front of them, some were far ahead, which was true of every class she had ever taught, but they were genuinely engaged, which was rarer, and which she had learned over years of teaching could not be faked. Children who are bored cannot pretend to be interested for 2 hours. She asked Nora about the curriculum. Nora told her, candidly, that it was built from scratch 30 years ago and revised constantly, and that the biggest gap was science at the upper level, because the community's one trained scientist had died 4 years ago, and they had not yet found a replacement from within. "What kind of science?" Maya said. "Physics, primarily. Some chemistry. The practical parts we can manage. The theoretical foundation is thin." Maya nodded slowly. She was thinking about the maps on the walls and about the boy who did not know Clover Falls, and about the gaps that exist in every education, private or public, and how rarely the people inside an educational system can see clearly what is missing from it. She spent the afternoon in the gardens with a woman named June who had the kind of patience with soil and seeds that Maya had only ever seen in people who had been doing something their whole life. June spoke in practical language about yield and rotation and the specific qualities of the clay-heavy ground in the northeast corner of the growing area that made it good for root vegetables and difficult for anything leafy. Maya listened. She asked questions. June answered them without performing, without making the information dramatic, and Maya found that she was genuinely learning something, not just gathering data, but understanding a system, the way the parts of it held together and depended on each other. The way the thinking behind it was more sophisticated than it looked from the outside. That evening, dinner was in a hall she had not seen before, a wide room at the center of the residential area, with long tables and benches, and the kind of noise that many people eating together make, comfortable and layered. Cale sat at the head of the longest table. There was a seat to his left that she was directed to by Owen without ceremony, and she sat in it and ate the meal that everyone else ate, a thick winter stew, bread, a sharp preserved cheese, and tried to pay attention to everything at once without being obvious about it. The people around her were curious. She could feel it, the way you can feel a room thinking about you, but no one stared, and no one asked her intrusive things. A man across the table introduced himself as Martin, and asked what she thought of the cold, which was a purely ordinary question that she answered in a purely ordinary way. The woman beside her, older, small, with the look of someone who had decided long ago which things were worth her time and which were not, passed her the bread without comment and then ignored her entirely, in a way that felt more respectful than attention would have. She did not talk to Cale during the meal. He was engaged with the people around him, listening and responding, managing a dozen small interactions with the same quiet efficiency she had seen him apply to everything else. She watched him in her peripheral vision, the way you watch something you are still calibrating. After dinner, when the hall emptied and the tables were wiped down by a rotation of people that seemed to operate without being directed, he appeared at her elbow. "Walk?" he said. She put on her jacket and followed him outside. The evening was cold and very clear. Stars she did not usually see, obscured in her town by the collected light of the county, were thick and close overhead. She looked up at them as they walked and thought about navigation, about the centuries when you found yourself by looking at fixed points in the sky, rather than at a screen in your hand. They walked along the outer edge of the compound, where the buildings gave way to the fence line, and the fence line gave way to trees, and the trees stood still in the cold. Their breath made small clouds. "You spent a long time in the school," he said. "It's extraordinary," she said, "the maps especially. Nora started that 8 years ago. Every student who learns to draw maps draws one for the wall. So the wall is the whole history of who learned what in that room." A pause. "I hadn't thought of it that way." She looked at the sky again. "You have a science gap." "We know." Nora said the previous scientist died 4 years ago. He did. She waited for him to add something. He did not. That was one of the things she had been cataloging about him. The way he did not fill silences with things that were not necessary. Most people, when a sentence could go further, pushed it further out of habit or anxiety. He did not. What would it take, she said carefully, to bring someone in to teach it? Not permanently. For a season, maybe. Someone who knew what they were doing and could at least give the older students a foundation to build on. She felt him look at her sideways. That's not a hypothetical question, he said. No, she agreed, it isn't. They walked another 20 yards in silence. The gravel underfoot was hard and cold. You teach geography, he said, and earth science, and I have a second degree in physical geography, which is close enough to applied physics in certain areas that I could at least fill in the lower levels. I'm not a physicist, but I know the ground between what they have and what they need. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. The compound lights were distant behind them, warm against the cold dark. In front of them the fence and then the forest, and beyond that, miles of land that nobody measured. You would need to leave your current position, he said. I have a break in January that's 3 weeks. I have summer. I'm not proposing to disappear. He turned to look at her properly, which meant she could see his face in the thin light from the nearest lamp. He had the expression he often wore when processing something he had not anticipated, which was not a visible expression at all. It was a quality of stillness, the absence of the small muscular movements that most faces make constantly. You came back here to ask that, he said. I came back here because you invited me, she said. That is true, but yes, the school was part of what I was thinking about. Only the school? She met his gaze steadily. I said it was part of what I was thinking about. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then looked out at the fence. I'll need to discuss it with the council, he said. We make decisions about external arrangements as a group. Of course. It won't be an immediate answer. I have 6 more days. I'm not in a hurry. He started walking again. She fell in beside him. They completed the loop of the compound in silence that was not uncomfortable, which was its own kind of information. At the door to her room, he said, You should know that no one from outside has taught in the school before. I know, she said. I figured. It would require a period of getting to know you, before the council would agree. Getting to know me, she said, as in, they would be watching how I behave this week. Yes. And you would be watching too. He looked at her for a moment. I've been watching since you came through the fence with your hands up. She absorbed that. Something about the way he said it, not predatory, not intimidating, but simply accurate, made her feel observed, and somehow less alone at the same time. Then I'll be myself, she said, which is all I know how to be. He nodded. He walked away down the path. She watched him go for a moment, then went inside. She sat on the edge of the bed with her jacket still on, and thought about what she had asked. It had felt reckless when she was thinking it, and reasonable when she said it, and now, with a night between her and the answer, she was trying to determine which of those two feelings was more accurate. She was a sensible person. She had a job. She had a plant and an apartment and a neighbor who would water it, and a life that was perfectly adequate in all the ways that a life could be adequate. She had not walked through that gate because her life was falling apart. She had walked through it because something about the first accidental crossing had lit a space inside her that she had not known was dark. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She was not the kind of person who confused an interesting situation with a meaningful one. She had done that once, in her early 20s, with a man who seemed extraordinary in context and ordinary outside of it. She had learned the difference. This was different, not because of Cale, or not only because of Cale, because of the school with the maps on the wall and the science-shaped gap in it, because of June and her clay-heavy northeast corner, because of the child who did not know Clover Falls and was not worse off for it, because of the feeling she had walking around a place that had decided what it was and built itself accordingly, and found that she could not entirely explain it and could not entirely leave it. She fell asleep with her jacket on and did not wake until morning. The next 3 days moved differently than the first. She was no longer a guest being shown around. She was something less defined and more interesting than that. A person in a place, present in the way that places require you to be when you are in them long enough. She helped in the kitchen one morning because she woke up too early and the only other person awake in the building was the man doing breakfast preparation, and she asked if she could help, and he said yes without making it remarkable. She chopped vegetables for 40 minutes in comfortable silence. It was one of the better 40 minutes she had spent in recent memory. She sat in on a class. Nora led her, and then stepped back and let Maya teach a section of it, A lesson on topographic maps that Maya had taught 100 times to 12-year-olds, and that worked just as well for 9 to 14-year-olds who had been drawing maps of real land their whole lives and understood intuitively what she was formalizing. The oldest student in the room, a serious girl of about 14 named Ellie, asked a question at the end that took Maya a full minute to answer correctly. She did not mind. She liked being asked hard questions by students who meant them. Kale watched through the classroom window. She saw him twice, in passing, standing just outside the glass. She did not acknowledge it. Neither did he. On the 5th evening, she sat with Martin from the dinner table, who turned out to be the community's primary carpenter, and he showed her, without being asked, the plans for a structure they were going to build in spring. A covered outdoor space, half workshop and half gathering area, a hybrid he had been designing in pieces for 2 years. He showed her the plans with the particular pride of someone who has thought about something for a very long time, and was glad to show it to someone who would take it seriously. She asked questions, he answered them. They talked for 2 hours. She walked back to her room past the main hall and found Kale sitting on the step outside it. "The council met this afternoon," he said. She stopped. "They want to meet you before they decide," he said. "Tomorrow morning. It won't be long." "Okay," she said. "They will ask you why," he said. "You should have an honest answer." She looked at him sitting on the step with his elbows on his knees and the lamplight on the side of his face. She said, "I have an honest answer. What is it?" She thought about it for a moment, not because she did not know it, but because she wanted to say it right. "This place is real," she said. "I spend a lot of time in places that are trying to look like something, that are managed toward an image of themselves. This one isn't. It just is what it is, and what it is serious and careful, and built by people who thought about it." She paused. "I want to be useful to something that serious. I haven't had that in a while." Kale looked at her from the step for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell them that, exactly that." She went inside. She prepared herself for tomorrow. She thought about maps and gaps and what it means to be useful, and she slept deeply and without dreaming. The council met in the main hall before the rest of the community arrived for breakfast. There were 7 of them. She had not known the number beforehand. She had expected 5, maybe 6, and 7 felt like more of a thing than she had prepared for. They sat along one side of the long table, and she sat across from them, which was not an intimidating arrangement, she told herself, merely a practical one. Kale sat at the far end, separate from both sides. She understood this immediately. He was not presenting her, not vouching for her, not performing any kind of approval or disapproval. He was present the way a structure is present. He would not tip the balance. The council would decide. The 7 people were not what she would have called a committee. They were not the kind of group that forms in organizations to manage things at a safe distance from consequence. These were people who lived here, who had built things here, who had children in the school and food in the root cellar and a stake in every decision that touched this place. They looked at her with careful, interested eyes. The oldest of them, a man she would later learn was named Walter, spoke first. "We know why Kale has brought this question to us," he said. "What we want to know is why you brought it to him." She told them what she had told Kale the night before. She said it plainly and without embellishment, the same way she had said it the first time, because the honest version of a thing does not improve with decoration. They listened. Then a woman who introduced herself as Diane said, "You have a permanent position at your school?" "Yes." "And you're proposing to take unpaid leave periods to come here?" "I have paid leave I haven't taken. I can use January and the summer. Beyond that, beyond those 2 periods, I don't know yet." Diane looked at her with a measured expression. "Beyond those periods," she repeated. "That's a long beyond." "I know," Maya said. "I'm not pretending to know what happens past the part I can plan for." Martin, the carpenter, who was at the end of the row and whom she had not known was on the council until this moment, said, "You've already spent time with most of us these past days. What do you make of us?" She thought about this honestly. "You know what you're doing," she said. "Each of you, in your own area. That's rarer than it sounds. Most institutions, most places, have people who are filling a role and people who actually know. Here it seems like the people who know are also the people in charge, which is a better arrangement than most." A small silence moved through the room. Walter said, "What would you need from us?" She had not expected that question yet, and she took a moment with it. "A room, meals, access to the students and to Nora, so we can figure out what they already know and where to start. I don't need payment. I have my salary from the school. I need to be trusted to teach the way I teach, which is directly and without oversimplifying. And I need people to tell me when I get something wrong about how things work here. Because I will get things wrong at first and I'd rather know. Diane said, "You're not asking for much." "What I'm offering isn't much either," Maya said. "Not yet. A foundation for the older students. Not a complete education. Something to build on." The council members looked at each other. Not the signaling, performative kind of looks that committees exchange when they want everyone to see them thinking. Actual looks, brief and communicating. Between people who had worked alongside each other long enough to speak without words. Walter said, "We'll discuss and let you know before the morning is out." She nodded and stood and left the hall. Cale was outside the door. He had not heard anything. The hall was solid, built to contain sound. But he was standing 2 yards from the entrance with a cup of something hot, and he held it out to her. She took it. Tea. She drank it. "How did it go?" he said. "I don't know yet." He looked at the door. Walter asked the most questions. "First question," she said. "Why did I bring it to you?" A pause. "What did you say?" "The same thing I told you last night." He nodded slowly. They stood in the cold and she drank the tea, and the morning moved around them, people crossing the yard on their various routes toward their various purposes, and she thought about what it would mean to be a part of this rhythm, even temporarily, even at its edges. At 10 in the morning, Owen came to find her in the garden where she was helping June cover the cold frames against the night's predicted frost. He said, "They're ready." She pulled off her work gloves and went. Walter stood when she came in and said, "We've decided yes. January and the summer, as you proposed. We'll review at the end of each period. If it's working for the students and for you, we'll talk about what comes next." She felt something settle in her chest, not triumph, something quieter. The feeling of a thing that had been uncertain becoming solid. "Thank you," she said. "All of you." Diane said. "Nora is very pleased," Martin said, from the end of the table. "The students are too. Particularly Ellie, who apparently asked you a question you couldn't immediately answer." "She did," Maya said. "It was a good question." Martin smiled. It was brief and genuine. "Good," he said. She shook hands with each of them and went back outside into the cold November morning, which was clear and very bright, the frost still on the edges of things. Cale was at the fence line on the east side, alone, looking out at the trees. She walked toward him and stopped beside him and said nothing for a moment. "Yes," he said, without turning. "Yes," she said. He kept looking at the trees. Something in his posture shifted, very small, barely perceptible, the way a person shifts when tension releases in a part of them they were not visibly holding. "January is 2 months away," he said. "I'll need to apply for leave from my school. Arrange the plant situation again, make a list of what to bring." She paused, the usual complicated simplicity of going somewhere. He turned then, and looked at her in the full morning light, and she saw his face without the dimness of evening, or the controlled context of the meeting hall. He looked tired in the way that people in charge of many things look tired. A background tiredness, structural, not acute. He also looked like someone who had just received news that was good in a way he had not fully expected. She looked back at him without trying to make it less than it was. "You should know," he said, "that I argued for it before the council met." She was quiet for a moment. "You told me you wouldn't." "I told you I wouldn't present you," he said. "I didn't. I told them it was worth considering seriously. There's a difference." She considered the distinction. It was a careful one. It was also, she thought, honest. "Thank you," she said again, because there was nothing else to say that was accurate, and she had learned already that he preferred accuracy to elaboration. He nodded, looked back at the trees. "I'll have Owen prepare the same room for January. The one with the window facing east?" "Yes." She looked at the frost on the fence posts and thought about 2 months of ordinary life, and what it would feel like to come back here from it. Different, she suspected. The way you look at a familiar thing differently once you have looked at it from outside its frame. "I leave tomorrow," she said. "I know." They stood at the fence for another minute in silence that was not empty. Then she went back to help June with the cold frames because there was still work to do and the frost would come regardless of what else was happening. And she had learned here that work was the common language of the place and she wanted to be fluent in it. That evening was the last dinner in the hall for this visit. She sat in her usual seat, left of Cale, which had stopped feeling assigned and started feeling like hers. Martin told a story about a structural miscalculation that had nearly brought down a storage building 12 years ago that had the whole table laughing before the end. Ellie, the 14-year-old student, appeared with 2 other children to clear plates and paused beside Maya and said, with the directness of someone who had decided to say a thing, "I hope you come back." "January," Maya said. "I'll be here in January." Ellie nodded once, satisfied, and collected the plates and left. Cale, beside her, said nothing, But she saw him watching Ellie go, and the expression on his face was not the controlled neutrality she had come to read as his default. It was something that was allowed to be visible because he had not noticed her looking. She did not name it then. She would name it later. After dinner, she walked the perimeter alone. Owen offered to accompany her, but she asked for 30 minutes to herself, and he nodded and stayed at the edge of the yard. She walked the outer path and looked at the fence and the trees and the deep, clear sky, and she thought about the 47 days between now and January. She thought about the drive home she would begin in the morning. Her apartment, the plant, the parking lot, the ordinary texture of a life in a town that appeared on every map. She had not realized, until coming here, how thoroughly she had stopped noticing the texture of her ordinary life. How it had become a background, not bad, not painful, just invisible in the way that familiar things become invisible. The commute and the grocery store, and the evenings with nothing particular to fill them. She was not miserable. She had not been miserable. She had been, she understood now, simply less awake than she was capable of being. She stood at the northeast corner of the fence, the corner that June had explained was above the clay-heavy ground, where the drainage run cut close to the base, and looked out into the trees. Somewhere out there was the section of fence that had been lifted, repaired now, the post replaced, the bottom edge set in gravel rather than soil so it would hold through the autumn floods. If she had arrived a week later, the fence would have already been fixed and she would have walked the perimeter, found no way through, and gone downhill looking for the creek. She would have reached the road eventually. She would have driven home. She would have given a talk on Monday morning about mountain time zones and not thought about this place at all. A fence repaired a week earlier. A sign with a weathered arrow. The left path instead of the right. She was not the kind of person who believed in fate. She believed in choices and their consequences, in the way small decisions accumulate and produce a life. But she also knew, in the clear and honest way that her best thinking always arrived, that some accumulations were not predictable, that sometimes a set of small wrong choices led to a right place. She turned and walked back toward the lights of the compound. Owen met her at the edge of the yard. "All right?" he said. "All right," she said. "Very much so." He walked her to her room and said goodnight, and she went inside, and began to pack carefully, placing each thing back where it had come from, folding the thermal blanket, setting her book on the top of the pack where she could reach it. She packed the way she did everything when she was paying attention, methodically, with a clear idea of why each item was where it was. She left the paper with the phone number in her jacket pocket. She always had. She lay down and looked at the ceiling. The compound was quiet, beginning its nightly wind down, the sounds becoming fewer and further between. She thought about the gap in the school's science education, about topographic maps and clay soil and covered outdoor spaces, about a man who had argued for her with the council before the council met and had not called it arguing. She thought about the word he had used when she had first asked to come back. That is not a small thing to ask for. She thought about the fact that he had said yes anyway. She fell asleep on the thought and woke to her alarm before the compound started moving, dressed in the dark, shouldered her pack, and went to say goodbye. January arrived the way January always did, without ceremony, with cold, with the flat gray light that asked nothing of you and offered nothing back. Maya drove north on the 2nd of the month with her car packed more carefully than before, not more heavily. She had thought hard about what the place actually needed from her, which was not equipment or supplies but knowledge, and knowledge did not weigh much. She brought her curriculum notebooks, a set of reference books she could leave behind, a small case of drawing instruments for the map-making class she had been planning since November. She brought enough personal items for 3 weeks and no more, because she was a person who had learned that comfort and simplicity were not opposites. She stopped at the same diner 2 hours south of the community. The same good coffee, a different waitress, who did not recognize her, which was ordinary and fine. She drove the rest of the way in the specific quiet of a long drive alone in winter, which was one of her favorite quiets. The road opened through snow-heavy trees and the sky was the color of an old photograph, and she played no music and thought about the semester ahead at her school, the map projections unit, the upcoming standardized testing her students found tedious, and she found only slightly less tedious, and let her mind settle into the particular kind of readiness she needed for teaching. When she entered the code at the gate, it worked on the first try. The compound in January was different. The gardens were bare, deep winter bare, and the paths between buildings were shoveled but narrow. The cleared snow banked on either side, so that moving between structures meant passing through shoulder-high white walls. The cold was a different quality of cold than November. Drier, cleaner, with an edge to it that meant business. People moved between buildings quickly, bundled, purposeful. Owen met her at the gate. "Welcome back," he said. He meant it, she could tell. He was not a person who said things he did not mean. She had established this in November. She followed him to her room, which was exactly as she had left it except for a small addition. On the chest of drawers that served as her table, someone had placed a jar of preserved summer berries with a piece of paper folded against it. She unfolded the paper. It said, in plain handwriting she did not yet recognize, "For when January is too long." No signature. She set it on the windowsill where she could see it and unpacked. She taught her first class the next morning. Nora had prepared the students, which meant they arrived with a specific and slightly competitive alertness. The alertness of people who have been told something interesting is coming and have decided to evaluate it properly. Ellie was in the front row. 6 other students ranged in age from 11 to 15, and one of them, a boy named Cal who was 12 and built close to the ground with a serious face that suggested he had been 12 for a very long time, announced before she had set down her bag that he was not good at science. "What are you good at?" she said. He thought about it. "Building things." "Good. We'll use that." She taught them the physics of structures first, not because it was the most important place to begin, but because it was the most immediately connected to what they knew and built and repaired every day. She drew load diagrams on the board, the way weight distributes through a beam, the way a joint works under compression versus tension, and she watched 12-year-old Cal's face change as he connected what he was looking at on the board to things he had watched Martin do in the workshop. That expression, the one where a face goes from skeptical to lit, was the reason she had become a teacher. She had lunch in the hall with Nora, who asked direct questions about the morning and made notes on a small pad while listening. Nora was the kind of person who listened while doing something else and lost nothing in the process. They planned the week together over soup, working out which students needed what, which gaps were structural and which were just surface anxiety, which topics could be approached through the students' existing knowledge of practical work, and which would need to be built from the beginning. Cale came to the hall at the end of the lunch period. He did not sit. He stood at the end of Nora's and Maya's table and listened to the last 4 minutes of their planning conversation without interrupting, and when Nora got up to go, he said to Maya, quietly, "How was the morning?" "Good," she said. "Cal is going to be something." "He already is," Cale said. "His father is Martin." She thought about Martin's bridge plans and his careful carpenter's logic, and the way he had explained structural loads to her without knowing he was teaching her to teach his son. "That makes sense," she said. Cale sat down across from her, in the seat Nora had left. He did not have food. He had a mug of something. "The council wants a report at the end of the 3 weeks," he said. "From you. What the students have covered, your assessment of where they are, what you'd propose for the summer." "All right. It can be informal. Walter prefers direct conversation to documents." "Then I'll talk to Walter." He looked at his mug for a moment. "I wanted you to know before you settled in that the arrangement has been well received, by the community generally, not just the council. People were prepared to be uncertain about it, and they're not." She looked at him. "That matters to you." "Of course," he said. "A community works on agreement, not just formal agreement, agreement at the level of how people feel about the things that happen here. If people had been uncertain, it would have shown, and you would have felt it, and your work would have been harder." She thought about this. "Are you telling me this because you want me to know, or because you want me to understand how this place works?" He looked up from his mug. "Both," he said. "They're not separate." She folded her hands on the table. "Then tell me something else that's both." A pause. He seemed to consider whether this was a reasonable request. He apparently decided it was. "The community has a decision about the spring structure Martin is building," he said. "The covered outdoor space. He showed you the plans." He did. A workshop and gathering space combined. "The question is the east-facing wall, whether to leave it open to the gardens or close it with windows for insulation. Martin wants to leave it open. 3/4 of the council want windows. He and I have been discussing it for 6 weeks." She looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think Martin's instinct is right, and the council's practicality is right, and the question is whether you can satisfy both at once." "Sliding panels," she said immediately. "Open in summer, closed in winter. Not cheap to build, but not complicated." He was quiet for a moment. "I suggested that in November," he said. Martin didn't want to hear it. He said it compromised the structure's intention. "His intention is for it to feel open," she said. "Panels that open fully accomplish that. When they're open, they're as open as no wall at all. When they're closed, you have your insulation." She paused. "Does he feel like a panel is less committed than no wall? Like it's a hedge?" Cale looked at her with something she had started to recognize, a quality of attention that meant she had said something he was holding still. Yes, he said. That's exactly what he means. Then the conversation is about commitment, not structure. He wants the building to be a statement about the community's relationship with the land. Closing it up for winter feels like a retreat. And your answer to that? A statement that stands regardless of conditions is stronger than one that only works in good weather. She looked at him. But I'm a stranger here. He'll listen to you. He'll listen to you, Cale said quietly. You've already earned that. She held his gaze across the table. The hall around them was nearly empty now, the lunch hour finished, people returned to their work. The light through the high windows was the flat winter white that made everything look both brighter and colder. She said, Is there something you want to tell me that isn't about the building? He did not look away. Several things, he said. Some of them can wait. She nodded. Okay. He picked up his mug and stood. I'm glad you came back, he said, plainly, as if the statement required no support, no softening, no qualification. She said, I know, and meant it. He left. She sat at the table for a few minutes and looked at the winter light coming through the windows. She went to the workshop that afternoon and found Martin reviewing his spring plans. She sat across from him and they talked about the east wall for nearly an hour, and she said what she had said to Cale. Commitment. Conditions. A statement that holds. And Martin was silent for a long moment, and then said, I hadn't thought of it that way. The sliding panels are the braver choice, she said, because they prove the openness is a choice, not just a default. Martin looked at his plans. He made a small notation in pencil. Did Cale send you? He said. No, she said. He told me about the disagreement. I came on my own. Martin made another notation. He talks about you, he said, without looking up. Not often, but he does. She did not ask what was said. She felt the information settle somewhere and waited for it to tell her what to do with it, and it told her to wait, which was usually the right thing, and also the hardest thing. The notation I just made, Martin said, tapping the pencil on the paper. Sliding east wall, 6 panels. I'll bring it to the council. Good, she said. She spent the rest of the afternoon at a work table in the corner of the workshop, not doing anything related to her teaching. Simply working beside Martin while he refined his plans, and the cold pressed against the workshop walls, and the smell of sawdust was clean and specific in the air. She thought about physics and structure, and the way an open wall in winter required more from a fire than a closed one, and she made a mental note to build that into the thermodynamics unit in a way that was grounded in what Cal and Ellie would one day actually build. Dinner, the hall, her seat. Cale, to her right tonight instead of her left, because someone else had taken the left seat first, and the community arranged itself without rigidity, which she was learning was one of its most deliberate characteristics. Martin said something across the table about the east wall. There was a ripple of interest. Diane from the council looked at Maya with an expression that was not unwelcoming. Cale did not look at her during the exchange. He did not need to. After dinner, she walked to her room and stood at the window with the jar of preserved berries visible on the sill. The handwriting on the note had been his. She had known it when she saw it. She had put the knowing away until now. She opened the jar and tried one berry. Summer, preserved, sweet and slightly sharp, the taste of a season that the ground had kept safe through the cold. She put the lid back on and went to prepare tomorrow's lesson. The 3 weeks passed the way full weeks pass, unevenly, with some days stretching long and others arriving and departing before she had finished deciding what she thought about them. She taught every morning. She spent afternoons in various parts of the compound, helping where help was wanted, watching where watching was appropriate, doing her own reading and planning in the evenings. Cal built a load-bearing model out of workshop scraps to demonstrate a lesson on compressive force, and the model held significantly more weight than either of them had expected, which prompted a conversation about material density that lasted an hour past the class period, and included 3 other students who were supposed to be somewhere else. Ellie finished the foundation-level physics Maya had set for her and asked what came next. Maya gave her 2 of the reference books she had brought and told her to read the first chapters of both and come back with questions. Ellie came back the next morning with 7 questions and the look of someone who had been awake thinking about them. She reported to Walter on the last Friday of the 3 weeks. They sat in his house, which was small and warm and crowded with the accumulated evidence of a life spent in one place. Handmade furniture, years of notations on a calendar still pinned to the wall, a pair of boots by the door that were clearly in their final season of usefulness. He listened to her assessment without interrupting and asked 3 questions at the end, all of them sharp, none of them unkind. Come back in summer, he said when she had finished. We'll talk about what comes after that. She drove home on the 23rd of January with the empty jar of summer berries in her pack. wrapped in a shirt so it would not break. She drove in the same flat gray light she had arrived in, through the same snow-weighted trees, and she thought about the academic semester ahead and the students who would need her to be fully present, and she was. But in the margins of the drive, in the long, quiet stretches between one town and the next, she thought about what comes next. Not the summer curriculum, not the structural gap in the school's science education, or the sliding panels on Martin's workshop, or the 7 questions Ellie had arrived with at 8 in the morning. What comes next? The bigger question, the one that had been building since November and was beginning to take up more space than it had before. She drove. She let it sit. She was a patient person when she chose to be. She drove the last hour through clearing skies, and somewhere in the final 20 miles, a specific thought arrived fully formed in a way that made her hands easy on the wheel. She was not going back in the summer to teach. She was going back because that place had become the clearest version of where she was supposed to be that she had ever stood inside. She let the thought exist. She did not argue with it. She arrived home, watered her plant, and slept 12 hours. The call came on a Thursday evening in March. She was sitting at her kitchen table grading a set of papers on watershed geography when her phone rang. She looked at the number before she answered, which she always did, and it was the number from the folded piece of paper that she still had in her jacket pocket, because she had never moved it. "Cale," she said. "There's a situation." His voice was its usual even quality, but something beneath that evenness was different. Something was wound tight. She set down her pen. "Tell me. A family who left the community 8 months ago is trying to return. They left in a disagreement about resource distribution. The council had voted to reduce individual allotments while the winter stores were rebuilt, and this family felt the reduction was unfair to households with young children. They left. They've been living in a town 2 hours west, and their youngest child has developed a serious respiratory illness. They're asking to come back and use the community's medical resources." She was quiet for a moment. "What's the disagreement?" "Whether their return is conditional. 3 council members believe they should commit to the same resource agreements as everyone else before being readmitted. Walter and Diane believe the child's situation overrides the procedural question, and they should come back without conditions while the child is being treated. What do you believe?" A pause. "I believe Walter and Diane are right. But I also believe the 3 council members are not wrong about the principle. So the argument isn't really about whether to let them back. It's about whether a health emergency changes the order in which you address the procedural question." "Yes." She thought about this. Let them back. Treat the child. Have the resource conversation after the child is stable. She paused. If you reverse the order, you make the procedural argument look more important than the child, which is not what any of them actually mean. And it will stay in the community's memory that way, as the time the council debated terms while a child was sick, which is unfair to the 3 council members who are making a legitimate point. The line was quiet for a moment. "That's what I told them," he said. In slightly different language, they're still deliberating. She picked her pen back up and set it down again. "Why did you call me?" A pause longer than his usual ones. "Because I wanted to hear you say it." She sat with that for a moment. "Cale." "Yes." "What are the 3 weeks in January you're still thinking about?" Another long pause. 37 things, he said, but one of them more than the others. She did not ask what it was. She could feel the weight of it through the phone, the specific weight of something a person has been carrying for a while and has not put down. 37 is a lot, she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." "Tell me one," she said. "Not the biggest one. Something in the middle." A quiet breath. Then, "I showed Martin's plans to a structural engineer I know in town. Confidential, trusted contact, just for a second opinion on the load calculations. He confirmed the east wall design was sound. I didn't tell Martin I did that." She waited. "He would have taken it as a lack of trust," Cale said. "But I needed to know the building was safe before I endorsed the design to the council. It's Martin's home too. It's his son's school. I wasn't going to put his plan forward without knowing." "That's not a lack of trust," she said. "That's responsibility." "I know that, but he would still have felt it as distrust." "Did you ever tell him?" "No." She thought about Martin's penciled notation, the easy confidence with which he had agreed to bring the revised design to the council. "He trusts you enough to have not asked," she said. "That's the same thing in a different direction." Cale was quiet. "You carry a lot," she said. "Yes," he said simply, not self-pity, not performance, just accurate. "The council's still deliberating," she said. "They are. Go back, let them know what you told me about the order of the conversation. Tell them plainly, not what to decide, but what order protects everyone's argument and everyone's dignity at once." I already did. Then they're deliberating in good faith, and they'll reach the right conclusion, she said. That's how it's supposed to work. You have a great deal of confidence in the process. I have confidence in what I've seen of the people, she said. The process follows from them. She heard him exhale slowly through the phone. It was the closest she had heard him come to the sound of setting something down. The family comes back tomorrow, he said. Walter called the vote. Good. Diane cried, he said, very briefly, in the hallway. No one mentioned it. Something moved in Maya's chest. That's a good community, she said, when people can do that and not have it become a story. Yes, he said. It is. They were quiet together on the phone for a moment. She looked at her grating. He was probably looking at whatever he looked at when he was thinking, which she imagined was a window or a door or the middle distance. Summer, he said. Early June, if you can. I can, she said. First week of June. I'll have the room ready. Cale. Yes. I'm going to apply for an extended leave of absence from my school, starting in the fall. The pause that followed was the longest she had heard from him. How long? He said. A year, initially. The leave policy allows it. I have the service record to qualify. And if they don't grant it? Then I resign, she said, but they'll grant it. She heard him breathe. Maya. I know what I'm doing, she said. I'm not impulsive. You know I'm not impulsive. I know you're not, he said. That's why I'm not arguing. You're not arguing, she said, but you're thinking something. I'm thinking, he said carefully, that an extended leave of absence presupposes an intention to return to the place you're leaving, and what you're describing sounds less like a leave and more like a decision. She looked at the papers spread on her table, the watershed unit, the erosion diagrams her students had drawn in different colors, careful and earnest, and evidence of actual learning. It might be both, she said. I don't know yet. All right, he said. Do you want me to know before I come in June, or can the knowing happen there? There, he said. The knowing should happen in the place it's about. She felt the truth of that. Then I'll see you in June. June, he said. The line closed. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at the papers and the pen, and the ordinary things of her ordinary evening. Then she picked up the pen and finished grading. She was thorough about it. Her students' work deserved her full attention, and she gave it. But something had shifted in the room, in the air, in the quality of the evening, subtle and irreversible, the way the light changes an hour after sunrise without your noticing the exact moment it became day. April and May moved with the particular purposefulness that comes when the future has taken shape but has not yet arrived. She submitted her leave application in April. Her principal, a measured woman named Carol who had always respected Maya's professionalism, asked 3 careful questions and approved it in 2 weeks. Her colleagues were surprised and not unkind about their surprise. The students she had taught all year were finishing their units, completing their projects, becoming slightly more themselves than they had been in September, which was the only metric she had ever believed in. She thought about what Cale had said. The knowing should happen in the place it's about. She turned it over many times. She was not the kind of person who confused feeling with certainty, but she was also not the kind of person who confused caution with wisdom. There was a difference between taking time to think and using time as an excuse not to decide. She had been deciding since the gate opened in November. She called her sister Louise in early May. Louise was 4 years older, practical, lived in a city 3 states away, had 2 children and a husband who built websites and a habit of asking the questions that Maya most needed to be asked. She told Louise about the compound, the community, the council, Nora and the school and the January weeks. She did not tell it in the order it happened. She told it in the order of what mattered, which was different. Louise listened, which was one of her best qualities. When Maya finished, Louise said, "This man, Cale, tell me about him without telling me about the community." Maya thought about this. He speaks exactly as much as needs to be said. He listens better than almost anyone I've met. He carries more responsibility than most people would take on, and doesn't perform it. He makes me feel like the clearest version of what I think, because he pays attention to what I actually say. Louise was quiet for a moment. And nothing, Maya said. And everything. I don't know what it is yet. I only know it isn't nothing. But you're going back, Louise said. Yes. And you've taken a year's leave. Yes. And you're a very sensible person who does not do things impulsively. Yes. Then, said Louise, you've already decided. Maya looked at her window. May light, warm and thick, the parking lot below full of cars belonging to people doing ordinary Saturday things. I think I decided in November, she said. I've just been doing the work of getting here since then. Louise said, I want to visit eventually. I know, Maya said. I'll ask. She packed for the summer in the last week of May. More than January, less than a full move. Books for the upper-level science unit she had planned. A set of hand tools she had bought specifically because she had watched June in the garden and thought about what it meant to have the right instrument for a thing. Her own reference materials, the drawing instruments for the map-making class, replenished. She wrapped the empty berry jar carefully and packed it at the top. On the first morning of June, she drove north. The same road. The same trees. Different now. Fully leafed, summer green, dense with the particular confidence of things that have been growing for months. The diner with the good coffee. This time the same waitress, who did not recognize her but gave her the same good coffee. She drove the last stretch in the full afternoon light of early summer, the sky wide and very blue, and she felt something she identified only when she was already inside it. She felt like she was going home. Not returning from somewhere, not visiting, going home. She entered the code. The gate opened. The compound in June was a completely different thing from the compound in November and January. The gardens were fully awake, green and heavy with early growth, buzzing with whatever work June and her team did in the long summer light. The buildings were open, doors and windows wide, people moving easily between them in the warmth. Children were everywhere, which she had not seen before, outside for the season, loud and present in the way children are loud and present when they have space and good weather, and nothing to keep them still. Owen met her. He was sunburned and smiling, which was a new configuration. Welcome back, he said. It looks different, she said, looking at the gardens. It is different, he said. Summer is different. She followed him to her room. Same window, facing east. On the chest of drawers, another jar. Summer berries this year, the current seasons, not preserved. Fresh, with a small card that said, in that same plain handwriting, these are from this year. No need to preserve everything. She stood at the window with the jar in her hands and felt something that was not complicated and not simple, and was exactly the right size for what it was. She put the jar on the windowsill next to the empty one she had brought back, and she went to find Cale, because the knowing was supposed to happen in the place it was about, and she was in the place now and she was ready. She found him at the east edge of the property, standing where she had stood alone in November, looking out at the trees. He heard her coming before she reached him. She had learned already that he heard most things, and he turned and watched her cross the last 20 yards without moving to meet her, which was simply how he was, not coldness but steadiness, letting things arrive in their own time. She stopped beside him. They looked at the trees together for a moment. The family with the sick child, she said. How is he? Better, he said. Much better. He's back in the gardens with June 2 mornings a week, which is apparently what he wanted. Good. The trees in June were a different prospect than in November. Full and close, a wall of green rather than a framework of bare branches. The same woods, unrecognizable in summer. I found the note, she said. I assumed you would. No need to preserve everything. Yes. She turned to look at him. He turned to look at her, which she had learned he did when a conversation required it and not otherwise, and which had become, in its particular rarity, a kind of event. I want to tell you something, she said, and then I want you to decide what to do with it. He waited. I came back in November because I was curious, she said. I came back in January because I could genuinely help the school, and I wanted to. I've been telling myself those two things were the only reasons, because they're both honest and both defensible. She paused. But you told me in January that there were 37 things you were still thinking about, and I've had my own version of that since November, and I've been deciding what to do with it since March, and I've decided to just say it directly, because you're someone who prefers direct things. He was completely still. I am not here only for the school, she said. I am here because this place has become the most alive I have felt in a very long time, and I think you are the primary reason for that, and I think you know it, and I think you've been careful about it, because you are careful about everything, and I am telling you now because you deserve to know, and because I would rather say a true thing out loud than carry it quietly until the year is over and I have to leave again. The silence that followed was the longest she had ever waited through. He looked at the trees. Then he looked at her. The note, he said. I wrote 3 versions of it. She waited. The first one said your name. The second one said come back in summer. The third one is the one I put with the berries. He paused. The third one was the most honest. She felt something move through her chest that was not quite warmth and not quite relief, but contained both. I have been careful, he said. You're right about that. This community runs on trust and on agreement, and introducing something complicated, something that might not work, into the structure of it carries risk. Not for me. For the people here who depend on things being stable. I know, she said. I thought about that. And? And I think you've been careful for the right reasons, but also for reasons that aren't about the community. You're careful because you've been alone in this role for a long time, and something unfamiliar is harder to trust than something you've managed before. He was quiet. I'm not criticizing, she said. I'm the same. I left for a life that made sense on paper and was a very good approximation of a life without being the whole thing. She paused. I'm 32 years old, and I've been a very good approximation of myself for 3 or 4 years now. I'd like to stop. He turned toward her fully. Both shoulders, both eyes. The full, deliberate attention she had come to understand was how he gave himself to things he cared about. I am 40 years old, he said. I have run this community since I was 31. I inherited it from my father, who inherited it from his, and I have kept it alive and kept it honest, and kept 300 and some odd people fed and safe and in agreement with each other. I have done very little else. She held his gaze. I did not expect you, he said. Not the accident. The fence was an accident, and accidents can be managed. I mean, you, what you are, the way you see things. He stopped. I did not expect to find someone who understood this place before I had to explain it. She exhaled slowly. Cale. Yes. The 37 things, she said. Tell me one of the big ones. He looked at her for a long moment. The summer trees moved behind him in a light wind, green and enormous and alive. That I do not know how to do this slowly, he said. I know how to run a community. I know how to make decisions. I do not know how to begin something slowly with someone I already trust, more than I have trusted most people I have known my whole life. I don't need slowly, she said. Maya. I've been on slow for 9 months, she said. I have been very careful, and very patient, and very sensible, and I have done it well, and I am not asking you to be careless. I'm asking you to be honest, with me, the same way I just was with you. He looked at her for a moment that stretched. Then he reached out and put his hand around hers, both hands, her right hand held between his, the way you hold something you are deciding to keep. I am glad you misread the sign, he said. She turned her hand and held his back. I know, she said. So am I. They stood at the fence line in the summer light for a long time, talking about nothing important and everything important at once, the kind of conversation that wanders and does not need a destination. She learned that he had grown up here, that his mother had been the community's primary medical person before she retired to a quieter life in the eastern residential area, that the governance structure he now ran had been his grandfather's invention, a system of council votes and individual agreements that had worked imperfectly and reliably for 40 years. He learned that her father had been a cartographer, which was where the geography had come from, that she had been to 6 countries and found that what she was most interested in each of them, was not what the guidebooks pointed to but the systems. How food moved, how decisions were made, how people managed to live alongside each other in dense proximity and still be individuals. You were always going to end up somewhere like this, he said. I didn't know it until I was here, she said. That's the definition of finding something, he said. You don't know what you were looking for until you stop looking. She thought about that. I wasn't looking. Neither was I, he said. She squeezed his hand briefly and let it go, because the gardening team was moving along the nearby path, and she was not ready to explain anything to anyone yet, and he understood without being told. He stepped back to his original position. She stepped back to hers. Dinner, he said. Dinner, she agreed. She walked back toward the main buildings. At the edge of the garden she paused and looked at the community in full summer light. The buildings warm in the afternoon sun, the children loud in some distant corner, the smell of food beginning somewhere, the particular sound of many people who know each other and know what they are doing and do not need to announce it. She went to find Nora because there was curriculum to plan and summer to use and work to do, and work was how she contributed her own weight to the structure. She taught all of July. The summer class was different from January in the way that summers always were, less contained, more energetic, students who had been in the outdoors for months and brought the outdoors in with them. She taught physics through the living things they already knew, the mechanics of June's root vegetables, the load calculations for Martin's new covered structure, the thermodynamics of the cold frames in winter, the optics of the glass panels Martin had finally agreed to use for the sliding east wall. Cal built 3 more models, each one better than the last. He brought them to her not to show off but to ask questions. which was the behavior of a natural engineer, and she fed those questions with more precision than she had given anyone in years, because he could absorb it and grow. Ellie finished both reference books and started a third, one Maya had not assigned. She asked Cale if the community would be willing to set aside a budget for science materials in the school, and he said yes without deliberating, which meant he had already thought about it. He had a way of having already thought about things. She found it neither surprising nor frustrating. It was simply how his mind worked. He turned things over continuously, background process, so that when the moment of decision arrived he had done the preparation somewhere below the surface. She told him this one evening in July, sitting at the long table after the hall had emptied. He said, "Is that a criticism?" "No," she said, "it's a description. Most people decide when they have to. You decide in advance, quietly, and then wait for the moment to catch up." "It sounds cold," he said. "It's not," she said. "I've watched you with the council and with the families here. You don't announce the decision. You create conditions where the decision can be made well by whoever needs to make it. That's different from deciding for people." He looked at her across the table. "You've been watching me. Since November," she said. "You knew that." "I knew it," he said. "I didn't know what you were seeing. Mostly accurate things," she said. "One thing I got wrong initially." "What?" "I thought the control was about authority," she said. "The way you run the meetings, the way you manage information, the way you always have a little more of the picture than anyone else in the room. I thought it was about needing to be in charge. And now? Now I think it's about responsibility," she said. "You're not trying to be the most powerful person in the room. You're trying to make sure no one falls through the gaps. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "My father managed it differently," he said. "He was more visible about it. People knew they were being led. I always felt like being visible was a risk. If something fails, and you are visibly in front of it, the failure has a face. If something fails when the community has made the decision together, the community owns the failure, and the community can address it. That's not just modesty," she said. "That's a theory of resilience." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him in the evening light from the hall windows. He had the tiredness she had noticed in November, the background kind, but he also had something she had not seen as clearly before. A presence that was less defended than it had usually been. As if the weight of the role sat slightly differently when she was nearby. She did not say that. It was the kind of observation that needed to stay inside until it was more than an observation. "How many people know about us?" she said. "As something that is currently happening." He thought about it. "Owen," he said. "Nora. June, who noticed everything 2 weeks ago and has said nothing, which means she knows and approves. Walter, probably. He notices most things and keeps his own counsel. Martin? Not yet. Though he will soon. He pays attention to the hall." She nodded slowly. "Is it a problem, people knowing?" "No," he said. "This is a community, not an institution. People here have always understood that the people who lead them are also people. My father fell in love with my mother when she was the same kind of newcomer you were. Someone who arrived from outside and stayed because she understood something about this place that couldn't be explained." He paused. "She stayed for him, but she also stayed for the place. He always said that was what made it right. Both things true at once." Maya looked at the table. "Both things true at once." She turned that over. "I need to tell you something about the fall," she said. "The leave of absence." "Yes, I want to extend it, or end it. I want to talk to the council about a permanent arrangement, not just me as a visiting teacher. Something more formal, with an actual role, an actual agreement the way everyone here has an agreement." He looked at her. "I want to be here properly," she said. "Not as a visitor who comes back. Not as someone on leave from another life. I want to be someone who is here, in the same way the other 318 people are here. On the same terms. 320 now," he said. "The family came back." She smiled at that. 320, and me, if the council agrees. "They'll agree," he said. "You don't know that. I know them," he said simply. She looked at him. "If they agree, then what does that mean for the rest of it?" He met her gaze with the full, deliberate attention she had learned to read as the most complete form of honesty he had. "It means," he said, "that I stop being careful for the wrong reasons." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Good," she said. The council meeting to consider Maya's permanent membership was set for the third Tuesday of August, and she spent the 2 weeks before it in a state she identified as useful tension, not fear, not excitement exactly, but the heightened awareness of a person who knows something is coming, and has prepared all they can, and must now let it be whatever it will be. She did not change her behavior during those 2 weeks. That seemed important. She taught the same way she had taught all summer, helped in the garden on the same mornings she always had, ate at the same table, asked the same kind of questions she had always asked. She was not performing normalcy. She was being normal, which is different, and the difference matters particularly in a place that was, she had learned, extremely sensitive to performance. She had one conversation with Walter before the meeting. He came to find her in the school on a Monday afternoon when the children had gone home and she was reviewing the science books she planned to leave behind. He sat in one of the student chairs. He was a thin man, and the chair fit him surprisingly well, and she sat across from him. "You know what the meeting is about," he said. "Yes." "And you know what you want the outcome to be." "Yes." He looked at the books on the table. "Tell me why this is not just about Kale." She had expected this question, or a version of it. She had thought about the honest answer for 2 weeks. "Because I was thinking about how to get back here before I knew how much I wanted to stay for him," she said. "That's the simplest version of it. The school needed someone. I could do it. Those 2 things came first. What happened with Kale came after, and it came after because being here long enough to be useful is what let it happen. If I had just been visiting, if I hadn't been doing something real here, I don't think either of us would have let it become what it's become." Walter looked at her steadily. "And if this meeting ends differently than you hope, if the council has reservations that aren't resolved today, then I'll hear those reservations and I'll address them honestly, and we'll try again," she said. "I'm not going to pressure anyone. This community's agreement process exists for good reasons and I respect it." Walter nodded slowly. "You've been watching us," he said. "Since November," she said. "That's becoming a recurring sentence." He almost smiled. It was brief and small. "The council has already discussed most of what will be formally discussed on Tuesday," he said. "I'm telling you that so you're not walking into uncertainty you could avoid." She looked at him. And the conversation was not difficult, he said. He stood. He pushed the student chair back in. "Tuesday," he said, and left. She sat for a moment with the books and the afternoon quiet of the empty school, and thought about what that meant, and let herself feel the shape of what was coming. She called Louise that evening. "The meeting is Tuesday," she said. "How do you feel?" Louise said. "Like I've already decided, and I'm waiting for the formal part to catch up." "That sounds about right for you," Louise said. "You don't feel things early. You feel them suddenly and then they're completely decided." "Is that a criticism?" "It's a description," Louise said, with an echo that Maya recognized. "It's one of your better qualities, actually. You don't panic and you don't dither. You just wait until you know." "I knew in November," Maya said. "I didn't want to admit it in November." "What changed?" "Summer," she said simply. "Being here when it was alive, seeing what it could be with more time and more of me in it." She paused, and him. "We talked, this summer, in a way we hadn't before. The fence came down." She paused again, aware of the metaphor. "I mean, the carefulness." He stopped managing what he said to me. "What did he say?" Louise asked. Maya thought about the evening at the long table, the fall of light, the quiet hall. "He told me his mother was a newcomer too," she said. "Someone from outside. He told me she stayed for him, but also for the place, and that his father always said that was what made it right." Louise was quiet for a moment. "He told you about his parents?" "Yes." "Maya," Louise said. "He was telling you that he sees the same pattern." She looked at the jar of summer berries on the windowsill. "The current seasons, these are from this year. No need to preserve everything." "I know," she said. "I know he was." Tuesday arrived. She wore what she always wore, which was practical clothes she could move in. She had a class in the afternoon, and it was important to her that today be a day that contained ordinary things as well as the significant one. She walked to the hall in the morning light and went inside and sat across from the council for the second time since November. 7 faces, the same 7 as before, plus Diane, who had an expression Maya had never seen on her, open, without the usual measured professional distance. It was the expression, Maya would understand later, of someone who has already decided to welcome something and is trying not to make it awkward. Kale sat at the far end again. His face was what it always was, controlled, present, giving nothing away. But his hands were flat on the table and his shoulders were slightly lower than usual, and she had spent enough time studying the way he held himself to know that this was the posture of a person who was very carefully managing their investment in a particular outcome. Walter said, "We have reviewed the proposal for Maya Carroll to join this community as a permanent member, with the role of primary educator and the same rights and responsibilities as all other members. We have 3 questions for her." The first, do you understand what permanent membership means in terms of what you give up outside this community? She said yes, and she told them what she understood, that external identification, affiliations, addresses, would be managed through the same small network of trusted external contacts that handled the community's other external needs, that her legal and financial arrangements would need to shift, that she was prepared to do this work carefully and without rushing. The second question was Walter's, what do you contribute and what do you need? She answered in the same way she had in November, directly. She told them what she could teach, what she had already built in the school, what she planned for the following year with Cal and Ellie and the younger students coming up. She told them what she needed, a room, the materials list she had already provided to Nora, the same trust they had extended during her visits. The third question came from Diane. It was not the question Maya had expected. Diane said, what do you love about this place? A quiet fell over the table. Maya looked at the council members, one by one, and then passed them to where Cale sat at the end, watching her with the specific quality of attention that she had come to understand was the only language he had that he was not careful about. She said, that it knows what it is, that every person here has chosen it, that the food is grown by the people who eat it, and the buildings are built by the people who live in them, and the children are taught by people who have stakes in them, that decisions are made slowly and argued honestly and then held to, that nobody here is performing a version of themselves. Everyone is just the actual person. She paused. I have lived in good places and worked in good institutions, and I have never felt, anywhere, that the place itself was asking something real of me. This one does. It asks me to be actually useful, actually present, actually honest. I have not been asked that consistently by anything since I was a child. The table was quiet. Then Martin at the end of the row said, the east wall. She looked at him. The thing you said about the panels being the braver choice, he said, because the openness becomes a choice instead of a default. He put his hands flat on the table. My father built the first version of that workshop. He died before we needed to expand it. I've been thinking about the expansion for 5 years and couldn't resolve it. He looked at her. You understood what I meant before I'd finished saying it. That doesn't happen often. She nodded slowly. Welcome, he said. Simply, as if the formal part of the meeting was already done. Walter looked around the table. The vote, when he called it, was 7-0. She breathed. Cale did not react visibly. She had not expected him to. But his hands, which she had been watching peripherally, moved from flat on the table to folded, a small private change, the gesture of a person putting something safely away. She thanked the council. Walter said they would handle the formal agreements in the coming days. Diane said she would coordinate the practical arrangements for making the room permanent. Martin said he would build her a proper desk for the classroom, not the folding table that was currently there. She shook hands. She left the hall. Cale was outside. Of course he was. She walked to where he stood and stopped 2 feet from him and said nothing, because there was nothing specific that needed to be said. And he said nothing too. And they stood in the August morning light that was the kind of light that comes before the season tips into autumn. Still warm, but with a memory of what's coming in it. Then he said, Martin is going to tell everyone in the workshop about the vote before lunch. I know, she said. By dinner it will be general knowledge. That's all right. He looked at her. You're sure? I have been sure, she said, for 9 months. The formal meeting was for the community, not for me. Something crossed his face then, brief and clear, the kind of expression that a person has when they are feeling something they do not usually let themselves feel in visible light. Not happiness exactly, something less simple, the feeling of arriving. He reached out and put one hand briefly at the side of her face, not a gesture of possession, not dramatic, just the specific kind of touch that means, here, finally, you. And then he put his hand down and she heard him breathe once, slowly, and she looked at him in the full light of an ordinary August morning, and understood completely why she had misread a weather-faded sign and taken a wrong path 9 months ago. Owen appeared from the direction of the gardens, stopped when he saw them, said, oh, and walked a different way. They both watched him go. He's going to tell June before Martin tells the workshop, Maya said. He already texted her, Cale said. He doesn't know I know he can do that from here. She looked at him. You know about the phone. I know about most things, he said, without any weight on it, just quiet fact. It doesn't bother me. Owen is 24. He grew up here and he's loyal to this place in a way that goes bone deep. A text to June is not a security problem. She looked at the garden edge where June was visible, already pausing in her work, already looking toward the main buildings. She's going to cry, Maya said. Probably, he said. She looked back at him. She was going to say something else, something about the afternoon class, the curriculum, the practical shape of a day that still had hours in it. She was going to be reasonable and forward-looking, because that was what she was. She said, "Cale." He said, "Yes." She said, "Stop managing the distance." He looked at her. He looked at her for the length of 3 slow breaths. Then he walked the 2 feet between them and put his arms around her in the full open middle of the yard, in the August morning, without any of the careful positioning or managed visibility that had characterized the last 9 months. She put her arms around him and felt the whole solid weight of a person who had been carrying everything alone for a very long time. He said, very quietly into her hair, "I've been ready for a while." "I know," she said. "So have I." June, from the garden, made a sound that was not quite a word. Martin came out of the workshop. Owen was pretending to examine the fence post at the eastern corner. None of them said anything. The compound moved around them the way it always moved, purposefully, honestly, with the easy efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing, and Maya stood in the middle of it and held on to the man who ran the whole thing, and felt for the first time in longer than she wanted to count, that the place she was standing was the exact right size for who she was. By October, she was so woven into the daily rhythm of the compound that she sometimes had to remind herself, on the drive back from a supply run with Owen, or during a long Tuesday council observation meeting, that she had not always been here. The memory was still clear, the faded sign, the lifted fence, the cold ground, her hands up in the clearing. It had not lost detail or softness the way other memories did over time. It was sharp and available, and she returned to it sometimes not out of nostalgia, but because it reminded her of what particular set of small accidents and honest choices had led to this particular Thursday morning, teaching Ellie the mathematical language for something Ellie already understood intuitively. Ellie was 15 now. She had grown through the summer in the way that certain 15-year-olds grow, not just taller but sharper, more angular, more herself. She had a manner in the classroom that Maya recognized because it was her own manner at the same age, serious, a little impatient with explanations she considered unnecessary, entirely capable of sitting with a difficult problem without needing to be reassured that it would become easier. "If I wanted to calculate the exact angle of the sun over the garden at winter solstice," Ellie said one morning, not as a test question but as a real question she had apparently been thinking about, "what would I need?" "The latitude of the compound," Maya said, "which we have. The date, which you know, and the math of solar declination, which you don't have yet but can learn today." Ellie looked at her. "I want to design a cold frame that uses the maximum winter sun angle." Maya set down the reference book she had been holding. "That's a complete project," she said. "That's a design project, a math project, and a physics project." "I know," Ellie said. "Can we do it?" "We can," Maya said, "but it's going to take the rest of October." Ellie was already writing something down. Maya looked at the classroom, the maps on the walls, more of them now than when she had first arrived, new ones from this year's students covering the spaces that had been empty before, a palimpsest of who had learned to see the land, building up over time. She had contributed to that, and would keep contributing to it, and the accumulation of it felt like the right kind of thing to be part of. She thought about Cale's phrase, "both things true at once." She had told him one evening in September, while they were doing the thing they had started doing, a late walk before the compound went quiet, not every evening, but many evenings, during which they talked about the day's specifics or nothing at all, depending on what the day had been, that she had been thinking about her father. He had asked what she was thinking. She had said that her father had spent his life making maps of places he had never been to, working from other people's accounts, from altitude data and geographic surveys, translating information into legibility for people who needed to navigate, and that there was something admirable about that, something useful, but that it had always given her a faint unease she had not been able to name as a child. "And now you can name it," Cale had said. "A map made from the outside is always a reduction," she had said. "It can only show what the surveyor knew how to look for. What I do here, teaching from inside the place, living alongside the thing I'm describing, is more honest. Less clean, maybe, but more honest." He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "My grandfather used to say that the most dangerous maps are the ones that look complete." She had looked at him in the dark. Where did he mean that? "Everywhere," Cale had said. "Plans for the community that assumed everything had been accounted for. Agreements that looked settled but had gaps no one had admitted to." His argument was that uncertainty should be visible, that a map with blank spaces is more trustworthy than one that fills them in with guesses. She had thought about this for a long time. "Your whole governance structure," she had said. "It's built on that. The reason the council votes instead of you just deciding. The reason people can leave and come back. The reason there's no single person who has all the information. Yes, he had said. Your grandfather was a systems thinker. He was a stubborn man who had been wrong several times in his life and decided to build the wrong out of the system. She had laughed. He had made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but was close, and they had walked the rest of the path in a comfortable quiet. That was September. October was already showing its edges in the mornings, the cold that would become November sitting just outside the edge of each day, and Maya had the feeling of a person who had been in a place long enough to know what the seasons would do, and was not afraid of any of them. She and Nora met every Thursday to review the students and the curriculum, and the ongoing question of what the school needed. Nora had become, over the course of the year, one of those people in Maya's life who was so immediately useful that it was hard to remember a time when that specific kind of conversation had not been available. Nora thought about education structurally, about systems and sequences and the order in which things needed to be understood, and Maya thought about it from inside the student's experience. And the combination was, Nora had said with characteristic directness, better than either of them alone. The school had grown in the year Maya had been fully part of it, not in the number of children, which was determined by the community's birth patterns, but in what it contained, the science materials. A corner that Ellie had organized herself into a kind of reference library, books on shelves she had built with Martin's help, a set of measurement instruments, levels, compasses, a simple transit, that Martin had contributed from the workshop, a running project board on the east wall where ongoing work was posted, and anyone who wanted to see what the students were doing could look. June had brought her granddaughter to the school to see the project board in September. The granddaughter was 4, and had stood in front of it for a long time, with the focused gravity of a small child encountering something interesting. "What is that?" the granddaughter had said, pointing to one of Ellie's solar angle diagrams. Maya had crouched beside her. "It's a drawing of where the sun goes in winter," she had said. The granddaughter had considered this. "It goes somewhere?" "It goes lower," Maya said. "It stays closer to the horizon, instead of going high overhead, so the days feel shorter, because the sun doesn't climb as high." The granddaughter had thought about this seriously. Then she had said, "Does it get tired?" Maya had said, "I think it just has a different path." The granddaughter had nodded, satisfied, and gone to look at the maps. She had told Cale this story that evening on the walk. He had been quiet for a moment, then said, "She's June's whole heart, that child." He paused. "Her parents aren't here. They left before she was born. June raised her." Maya had already known some of this, the outline of it. "Do the parents know where she is?" "They do," he said. "They're not absent by choice. They left for the city and couldn't find their way back to a life here once they'd had a different one. June doesn't say much about it. Bridget, the granddaughter, was born here and she'll grow up here, and June has made that a complete thing instead of a partial one." Maya had thought about this for a while. Does it happen often? People who leave and can't come back? "More often than people who leave and return," he said. "This is a demanding way to live. It asks things of you continuously. Some people are built for that, and some aren't." She had looked at him in the dark. "Are you asking whether I'm built for it?" "No," he said. "I haven't been uncertain about that since January. January was only your 3rd month knowing me." "I know," he had said. "That's what surprised me about it." She remembered that conversation now, in the classroom with Ellie writing solar angle calculations and the October morning pressing against the windows, and she turned it over the way she often turned over things Cale said, not because they required interpretation, but because they rewarded attention. At the first November council meeting, a year, almost exactly, since she had first sat across that table, Walter asked if she wanted to speak to the community at the winter gathering. It was an annual event, a large dinner in the hall that marked the turning of the year, and community members who had something significant to report or share could do so. She said yes. She thought about what to say for 2 weeks. Not the words exactly, she would trust those to the moment, but the substance. What she wanted the community to understand about the year that had just passed, and what she hoped for in the year coming. She talked to Cale about it the night before. He was at the table after the hall had emptied, which was where she most reliably found him in the evenings, going through the day's notes. He had a consistent kind of tiredness at this hour. Not the acute tiredness of a bad day, but the general tiredness of someone who had been making decisions since early morning, which he always had. "What do I say?" she said. He looked up. "What do you want them to know?" She thought about it. "That I understand what I was given," she said. "Coming here, having this year. I don't want them to think I take it for granted. I don't want to make it dramatic. I'm not a person who speaks in grand terms, but I want them to know I see it clearly." He was quiet for a moment. "Then say that," he said, "exactly that way. That simply? This community doesn't need eloquence," he said. "It needs honest accounting. Tell them what you received. Tell them what you intend to give." She looked at him. "Is that what you do? When you speak to them?" "When I do it well," he said. She nodded. She went over it once more in her head, the architecture of what she meant, and then she let it go. She had learned from him, over the year, that preparation was important, and that at some point you had done all the preparation you could do, and the rest belonged to the moment. The winter gathering was the last week of November. The hall was as full as she had ever seen it. Children at the children's tables, everyone in the specific warmth that many people together in a cold season creates. The food was the best of the preserved and dried and stored, the last of the summer's work, made into something celebratory. She spoke third, after June and after Martin, who both spoke briefly and well. She stood at the end of the hall and looked at 320 people who had chosen this place, and each other, and she said, "I came here by accident. I misread a sign and crossed a fence in the dark, and arrived in the middle of something I didn't understand yet. You were careful with me. You gave me room to prove what I meant before you decided what to do with it. That is not a small thing, to hold your trust long enough for someone to earn it, instead of requiring them to earn it before you extend any trust at all." She paused. "I am a geography teacher," she said. "I have spent my whole career teaching people how to read the places they live in, how to understand the landscape beneath their feet, how to see the systems that shape the spaces around them. I thought I knew what a place could be. I didn't. I didn't know a place could feel like an argument, a good, careful, ongoing argument that a community makes with itself, and with the land, and with the question of how to be worth what it costs." She paused again. "This place makes that argument every day. I am glad to be part of it." She sat down. Cale, at the head table, was looking at the far wall. He had been looking at the far wall for the duration of her speaking, which she recognized as the thing he did when he was feeling something he was keeping private. She looked at the far wall too, just for a moment, the way you look in a direction someone else is looking to understand what they might be seeing there. She didn't see anything particular, just the wall, with its notched wooden beams and the maps above the doorway that someone had put there years ago. But she understood that he was holding something the year had given him, and that understanding it was enough, for now, because some things did not need to be said to be completely real. After the gathering, the community spilled into the night in the way people spill out of warmth into cold, reluctantly and laughing, the children the last to give up, running between the adults with the surplus energy of small people who had been sitting for too long. The sky was clear and very cold and extremely full of stars. She stood in the yard with her arms crossed against the temperature, and watched the compound come apart and reassemble itself as individual families moving toward individual homes, the familiar choreography of a community that knew its own shape. Owen walked past her with his jacket already half off because Owen was always warm. He said, "Good speech," without stopping. June, walking with Bridget asleep against her shoulder, reached out as she passed and squeezed Maya's arm once. She did not stop walking. She did not need to say anything. Martin paused. "The classroom desk," he said. "I'm finishing it this week. Cherrywood. It'll last you 50 years. She looked at him. "Martin, you said the right thing about the building," he said, meaning the east wall, meaning the panels, meaning that November conversation that had never been resolved into a formal moment but had mattered. Saying the right thing deserves a good desk. He walked on. Cale appeared at her side. The yard was nearly empty now. "The desk is going to be extraordinary," she said. "He's been planning it since August," Cale said. "He's shown me the plans 4 times. She looked at him. He was watching the last of the community drift toward their homes, that particular quality of attention on his face. Present, accountable, always alert to the periphery. "Cale," she said. "Yes. Thank you for the gate." He turned to look at her. "The gate code?" he said. "All of it," she said. "The gate code and the room and the 2 cups of coffee and the note about preserving things and the January and the summer and the argument to the council before the council met." She looked at him steadily. "All of it." He held her gaze in the cold, starlit dark. He said, "I left the gate because I thought you might need it." "I know," she said. He said, "I didn't know I was leaving it for myself too." She reached out and found his hand in the dark, the same way she had found it on the fence line in June, and held it. They stood in the empty yard and the compound was quiet around them, all its people home, and the stars above the fence line were the same stars that had been there the night she had arrived, without knowing anything about this place, or the man who ran it, or what it would mean that she had come through a broken section at the base of a fence in the rain-softened earth. "It's been 1 year," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to tell you something." "All right." "I would have taken the right path if the sign had been legible," she said. "I would have stayed on the trail. I would have driven home and taught my classes, and I would never have known this place was here." "Yes," he said. "I think about that sometimes," she said. "How close the whole thing was to not happening." He was quiet for a moment. "I think about the fence repair," he said. "If the drainage crew had finished the week before, the gap would have been closed before autumn. You would have found the perimeter solid." She had thought about this too. The same thought, arrived at from his side. 1 week, she said. 1 week, he said. They looked at the stars. "I'm not someone who believes in fate," she said. "I believe in choices and their consequences." "I know," he said. "But I also believe," she said, "that sometimes a very specific set of accidents points at something true, and the choice is whether you see what it's pointing at." He held her hand more firmly. He said very quietly, "I saw it in the first week." She turned to look at him. "When you came back in November," he said, "you sat across the table in the same seat you'd used before, as if it were already yours, and you asked about the school, and made your case, and you were not performing anything. You were just being accurate about what you meant." He paused. "I saw it then. I was just careful." "For all the right reasons," she said. "For all the right reasons," he agreed. She leaned against him in the cold. He put his arm around her, solidly, the way a person holds something they are not planning to put down. The compound was very quiet. The stars were very clear. Somewhere beyond the fence, the forest stood in its winter silence, the same forest she had walked through in the dark a year ago, carrying a headlamp and a thermal blanket and a compass that had not saved her from the wrong path. She was grateful for the wrong path. She was going to be grateful for it for the rest of her life. 3 years later, she was still in the room with the east-facing window. Not the same arrangement of things. The room had grown as she grew into it. The chest of drawers replaced by the cherry wood desk Martin had built, a second bookcase along the wall that had been bare, a map she had drawn herself of the compound and its surrounding land pinned above the window and updated with small notations every season. The room was the same room and a different room, which was true of most things over 3 years of daily use and daily attention. She had her own key to the gate now. 2 keys, one on her ring with the others, one hanging on the wall beside the door so she always knew where it was. Louise had visited in the second summer. She had driven up in early July and Owen had met her at the gas station and driven her in, and she had spent 4 days in the compound with the specific expression of a person who is revising a very large expectation and finding the revision favorable. She had spent most of her first day with June, who had apparently told Louise everything about Maya that the community had observed in the previous year, which was considerable and precise, and which Louise had reported back to Maya with an expression that was 9/10 fondness, and 1/10 the satisfaction of a person who had been right about a thing. "June thinks," Louise had said, sitting in Maya's room on the second evening, "that you were meant to end up here." "June is partial," Maya had said. "June," Louise had replied, "is also correct." Louise had spent her third day with Cale, which Maya had not arranged and had not worried about, because the things Louise most needed to understand about him were visible to anyone who paid attention. She had watched her sister watch him in the hall at dinner and seen the moment Louise stopped taking his measure and started simply seeing him, which was the same moment Maya remembered from her own experience, when the calibration finished and the person came forward. Louise had said nothing specific about it. She had hugged Maya for a slightly longer than usual time when she left, and on the drive home had sent a single text from the road, "He's the real thing." Maya had read it sitting at the cherrywood desk, and felt a warmth in her chest that was partly her sister, and partly the confirmation of something she had already known, and did not need confirmed, but was glad of anyway. The school had changed significantly over 3 years. Ellie had finished the foundation science curriculum and was now working through material that Maya was building alongside her, not because Ellie had outpaced what Maya knew, but because the specific combination of Ellie's intuition and the practical demands of the community pushed the curriculum in directions that required them both to work at the edge of what they knew. Ellie was 17 and would need, at some point, to make a decision about whether she would stay or go, and what more she wanted to learn and where she could best learn it. Maya did not push this conversation. She let it develop the way Ellie's thinking developed, through questions rather than conclusions. Cal had finished the structural load unit and moved through thermodynamics, and was now working in the workshop alongside Martin 3 mornings a week, which counted as part of his education, because the education here was not separate from the work of the community. Maya had designed it that way deliberately, and the council had agreed immediately, because it was simply the formal acknowledgement of something the community had always understood. 3 new students had joined the school, the children of the family who had returned with the sick child, who had recovered completely and was now, at 7 years old, one of June's most enthusiastic garden assistants. The 3 children had the particular ferocity of kids who had lived in 2 places and understood the difference, and their presence in the classroom made everything slightly more alive. Maya had not gone back to her old school. She had made this decision formally in the 2nd October of her permanent membership, when the extended leave of absence she had carried as a safety net needed to be either renewed or closed. She had sat at her desk for a long time looking at the form and thinking about the 2 versions of herself it represented, and then she had written a careful, grateful letter to her principal, and submitted the formal resignation, and had felt nothing she would call regret, which was the most honest possible answer to the question of whether she had made the right choice. She had called Louise that evening. Louise had said, "How do you feel?" Maya had said, "Like I've been building the same wall from both ends and they've finally met in the middle." Louise had said, "That is the most geography teacher thing I have ever heard you say." She had laughed and meant it. Cale had not said anything when she told him. He had been at the table, end-of-day notes in front of him, and he had looked up when she said it, and held her gaze for a moment, and then he had looked back down at his notes. But his pen did not move for a long time. That was how he processed good news. She had learned this over the years, the stillness, the pause, the pen that did not move. It meant he was holding the thing, turning it carefully, allowing himself to feel its full weight. Most people in his position had learned to respond quickly, to keep forward momentum as a management tool. He had learned that some things deserved to be stopped for. She loved him for many specific reasons, and that was one of them. The council meeting in that 3rd spring had included a conversation she had not anticipated. Diane, who had become over the years someone Maya spoke with regularly and trusted with the kind of observation she did not share widely, had raised the question of documentation. "We don't keep formal records of our governance decisions," Diane had said, "beyond what is strictly necessary. That is intentional. External documentation creates external exposure, but we have 3 years of educational practice now, 4 teachers across the school, a curriculum that has grown significantly, and no written account of how we arrived at any of it." Maya had been quiet, thinking. "You're asking whether to write it down," she had said. "I'm asking whether you think we should," Diane had said. Maya had taken this seriously for 2 weeks. She had talked to Nora. She had talked to Walter. She had not talked to Cale, because it was a school question before it was a community question, and she had learned, was still learning, would always be learning, the distinction between the decisions that were hers and the ones that went up the chain. She had come back to the next council meeting with a proposal for an internal curriculum record, structured, detailed, maintained in the school, accessible to all members but not designed for external use. A record of what had been taught, and why, and how it had evolved, and what had worked, and what had been revised. A map of the school's own history. Walter had read her proposal and said, "This is good work, Maya." Diane had said, "You designed it so that someone else could continue it." "Yes," Maya had said. "The school should not depend on any one person's memory. It should be able to outlast any of us." The council had approved it unanimously. Ellie had been the first to add to the record. A long, precise entry about the Solar Angle project, written with the technical clarity of someone who had thought the whole thing through completely. Maya had read it and felt the particular pride that is not personal because it is not about you, but about watching someone become more completely themselves. The covered outdoor space, Martin's structure, with its cherry wood beams and sliding east panels, had been completed in that 2nd spring. The community gathered for its first formal use in May, a warm evening that let them throw the panels wide and let the garden air through. Martin had stood at the east wall and pushed the first panel open himself, and it had moved smoothly on the track he had built for it, and the air had come in with the smell of new growth and soil, and the particular sweetness of a season just beginning. The community had applauded, not dramatically, not the kind of applause that a formal occasion demands, but the genuine kind, the kind that happens when people feel something. Martin had looked at Maya across the room. She had nodded. He had nodded back. Some things needed no more language than that. In the 3rd autumn, Cale asked her to be part of the governance structure formally. He asked her on a Wednesday evening, at the long table, with the same plainness he brought to everything. "Walter is stepping back from the council in the spring," he said. "He's asked to consult rather than vote. He's 73 and he's earned it. The council is looking at who fills the seat." She waited. They've asked me to bring you the question, he said, because they felt it should come from me first, whether you would be willing to be considered. She looked at him steadily. Considered? Or asked? The corner of his mouth moved. Asked, he said. She thought about it. Not long. She had not been in the community for 3 years without thinking about what the governance structure needed, and she had opinions about it that she had shared with the council informally, but had never had a formal mechanism to act on. Yes, she said. He looked at her. You didn't hesitate. I've been thinking about it since January, she said. Not this January. The first one. He shook his head slightly, which was his version of a laugh. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Only that you consistently have done the thinking before the question arrives. I learned it from you, she said. He looked at the table. He was smiling, a real one, not managed, not controlled, the kind that happened when he was not watching himself. She had been gathering those for 3 years and they were still rare enough to notice. The council will vote formally in April, he said. It will be unanimous. How do you know? I know them, he said. She looked at him across the table in the autumn light. 43 years old now, still carrying everything he had always carried, but carrying it slightly differently than when she had first sat across this table from him. Slightly lower, not because the weight had lessened but because the carrying had grown more practiced, and because, she believed this, and was not sentimental about believing it, there was a person across from him in the evening now, which there had not been before. Tell me one of the 37 things, she said, from that first call in March. He looked at her. That was 3 years ago. I know. Tell me one. He was quiet for a moment. The autumn evening pressed against the windows. The compound outside was moving through its ordinary closing, lights going on in the residential area, the hall beginning its dinner preparations, Owen crossing the yard toward the workshops. I was afraid, he said, that you would decide it wasn't enough, that a place this contained, this particular, this far outside the ordinary shape of a life, that it would become small to you, that you would outgrow it. She looked at him for a long moment. Has it? She said. No, he said. You've made it larger. She reached across the table and put her hand flat on the back of his. He turned his hand over and held hers. I want to tell you something, she said. Something I have been thinking about for a year. He waited. He was very good at waiting. When I was trying to understand why I came back the first time, she said, I kept using the school as the reason, because it was true, and it was clean, and it didn't require me to say the complicated thing. She paused. The complicated thing was that I came back because of how it felt to leave. I drove home in November, and the ordinary life I was driving back to felt thinner than it had when I'd left it, and the only way I could explain that was that I had been somewhere where the volume was turned up, where things were more real. She looked at him. You were the primary reason for that. You specifically, not just the place. I need you to know that. He held her hand on the table. I know, he said. I need you to know that I know, she said. Something moved in his face. That is a complicated sentence. It's a complicated thing, she said. I spent 3 years building something real here. The school, the curriculum, the record, the council seat, all of it real, and all of it mine, and all of it things I would have wanted regardless. And they are not the same thing as what I want with you, and both things are completely true at once. He looked at her with the full deliberate attention she had come to know as his most complete form of honesty. He said, both things true at once. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very plainly, in the way he said the things that mattered, stay. She looked at him. I'm already here. I know, he said. I mean stay. Longer than a year's membership. Longer than any formal period or agreement or vote. I am asking you to stay the way a person stays in a place that is their actual life. She held his gaze in the autumn light. Kale, she said. Yes. I misread a weather-faded sign 3 years ago, she said. I crossed a fence in the dark. You came out at dawn with your people behind you and you looked at me like I was a problem you had not anticipated, and I said I was sorry and I put my hands up and told you the truth. He waited. I've been staying since then, she said. I just needed the rest of it to catch up. He stood. She stood. He crossed the 2 feet between them the same way he had crossed it the first time, in August 2 years ago in the middle of the yard, without management or positioning, just directly, and he held her the same way, solidly, as if the question of putting her down had simply not arisen. She put her hands flat against his back and felt the whole long accumulated weight of what they had built, the two of them, with 3 years and a community and a school and a council vote and 37 things and a jar of summer berries, and it was the most real thing she had ever stood inside. Outside, the compound went through its ordinary evening. Owen crossed the yard. The hall prepared dinner. The lights in the residential area came on one by one. 320 people moved through the rhythm of a place they had chosen and built and continued to choose every ordinary day. Later, much later, when people asked Maya how this life had started, she would say, a wrong turn, a bad sign, a fence that had a lifted section and an October dark that came faster than she expected. All of that was true. What she did not say, because it was private and it was his, was that the moment she understood she would never leave had been simple and exact. It had been 2 jars on a windowsill, one empty and one full, and a piece of paper that said, "These are from this year. No need to preserve everything," and the understanding that she had been seen completely by someone who chose not to perform what he saw, who simply left the fruit and the note and trusted her to know what it meant. She had known what it meant. She had always known. The wrong path had been the right one. The lifted fence had been the door. The man who came out of the dark to find the intruder in his territory had been, from the very beginning, the reason she had stayed inside it. That was the whole story. And the whole story was enough.